All right, in the last part, we got all of our major posing out of the way. We've got our character, at least from the waist down, walking fairly appropriately, with a little bit of hiccups here and there. And now we're going to progress to the upper body. The only thing we need to do before that is just take a look at the hips and see if it's doing anything really jerky or strange that we might need to correct at this point. Likely it's not going to be pretty, but it's probably not going to be inappropriately jerky or anything like that. We just want to see if the motion is generally smooth. By the way, keep in mind that all of your graph editor values are moving completely forward in world space. So even though this looks like it's kind of bobbing around on the spot, your graph is still progressing on and on and on and on for the Z value. And for the Y value, it's just bouncing up and down the way that you would kind of expect, because it's just bouncing up and down in space. And same thing for translate X. It's just kind of seesawing left and right. Okay. So we might want to polish the hips right now before we do the upper body, because it's just going to cause an issue if we don't. So let's take a look. First, translate Z. This is the only one we maybe don't want to touch, because if you start adjusting these values, all of your leg positions change. Right? So if you push this, like say this looks out of line, and I start pushing that up, well, now I've got a hyperextended back leg, and even though that's a straighter line, it doesn't look right. And also, it's fine if your hips are bobbing forward and backward. That one's more to do with the lower body than the upper body. So that's the only one maybe we don't want to change. Translate Y, though, up and down. This one we could take a look and see, is there something we want to do about this graph? So what's happening is that we are taking the weight, pushing off, hitting an apex, transferring and taking the weight again. Okay, and this graph looks about appropriate for that. I could rotate this tangent handle a little bit to get a smoother descent. I could rotate these tangent handles just a little bit to get a smoother ascent and more eased apex like that. The only thing that's wrong is that the start and end tangent handles right now are flat. And if we do this, let's go ahead and view infinity. Oh, infinity's turned on, right? We want to cycle this one. So we're going to go curves, post infinity, cycle, just for this one, so that we can see this is what is actually happening when our animation resets, right? We've got this little hiccup here. So if we try to correct this just with this side, you're going to see we're only affecting this part of that hiccup, because the other part is over here. There we go. So now we've got a smoother, right? There's still a little hiccup there because I didn't match it up perfectly. What you can do, let's leave them both flat. I'm going to grab them both at the same time. And then I'm going to grab, holding shift, the left handle and the left handle for both of them. So it's treating them as if they're unified, which means you'll get a smoother adjustment. This is a little bit nerdy to do this, but you can get a nicer curve out of it. And if you wanted to exaggerate it, it's easier to exaggerate it. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And this curve, this animation curve, is not beautiful right now. I'm not really too concerned about that. I just want it to be smooth. Same thing's going to happen with translate X. This is the side-to-side motion. Notice we've kind of got a plateau here on both sides. I'm okay with that, but we could lessen the exaggeration of that. What this means, if I take a look at our character, is that we are sort of neutral, then we rapidly position over one of the feet, and then gradually increase to the apex finally here. Then we start to fall away, hit neutral, rapidly adjust, very slightly adjust to the final apex, and then start to come back to neutral. That's okay. I think that I would prefer it to be just a little bit less extreme. So I'm going to just move that down just a bit to there, just a bit to there, so that this is our apex on our passing position instead of our down position. And then for the rest of them, I just adjust the curves a little bit. I'm not so sure. So this is the passing position. I could have the passing position a little bit further than neutral. which is good. It makes the curve smoother. Go ahead and adjust this one the same way. I didn't move this one before. And so that means for this position that we've got on our contacts, our very first frame and our very last frame, I can do the same thing. Since I moved this one towards the top, I'm going to move these towards the bottom. And it looks like about 2 grid spaces. And I'm going to do the same thing I did last time, which is grab both the same side of the tangent handles so that together I can adjust them kind of like this. Let's see, is this too far? About there. I want to view the cycle. Just see. Yeah, it's a bit gross looking, but it's better than it was, at least. So I could figure out where's that appropriate amount. Looks like this one is making it lumpy. So we could just have a nice straight descent like that, or I could push this slightly further up to get a curvier descent. Same thing with this, I could reposition these handles, but I think that's about right. So I don't quite know what I just did there. I think this is the left and right position for the push-off. So I do want to check that I didn't vastly change the shape of my legs. It doesn't really look like it, but now it means that this left and right is much smoother, and the up and down is much smoother, but the forward to back is not. Forward to back is still bumpy and jerky. Okay, that's going to help though, because now the upper body is not going to look so silly as we're trying to bend and position the spine and position the arms and things like that. So just kind of getting rid of a potential problem right away. All right, let's get rid of the graph editor for now. Let's take a look at the body and the arms, since that's the next major portion. In this illustration, the body is just kind of a popsicle stick or hot dog or something. It's not really doing anything. In actuality, your spine is bending and flexing as you walk, especially with the difference between how male and female walks progress. I'm going to have an example for that later on. I already started posing it, but it shouldn't really be a part of this lecture because this default walk is sort of androgynous. What I will tell you, though, let's grab the spine pieces, is that as you take your steps, as you drop, your spine is probably unfolding, so it's sort of trailing back. And as you push back against the ground, it's probably squishing up forward just a little bit. So you're sort of bending or curling your stomach muscles a little bit before you unfold. Now look what happens if I do that. It's absurd. Okay, it's way too much. We got to get rid of all that. Okay, so with this perfectly straight, inflexible body, though, it looks mechanical. So it's sort of like, well, what do you do? In general, you just kind of try to oppose whatever's happening in the lower body. Here's the Animator Survival Kit portion. When you've got a foot planted that then takes the weight, oftentimes we're going to have a high hip on that side. We've got it opposite here for the sake of cartooniness. We can have the body bending away from the supporting side. Anatomically, that hip will usually be high on the supporting side. For animation, sometimes it's the inverse. It kind of depends on who you ask. I've heard both ways. I've observed both ways with real human beings. I tend to have the supporting leg being the high hip. I will say that makes it look more feminine. Okay, so if you don't do that, if you have the supporting leg being the low side, the lifting leg being the high side, it tends to look a little bit more like a cowboy or sort of like a sailor walk. So if you want it more masculine, you kind of do that. But doing nothing is not a good option, okay? If we do this, now we've got the entire body bending left and right as we do whichever one of those things. If you chose, let's go to the down position. If you chose to put a high hip on the down like that, what you would have to do then is bend the spine enough so that you end up getting level shoulders again, or approximately level shoulders. This will sort of sashay the hips left and right, which is why I say it looks more feminine. Okay, there is a different option though. Instead of doing that, you could just use the hip controller, which is independent of the upper body and just ends up changing the belt level. Now, I find that if you do that, the stomach needs to do the same thing to kind of bring it back in line before you rebend the spine anyway. And so, although you have a little bit more nuanced control over what's happening in the upper body, I just end up doing the same thing anyway of like leaning it over. So I prefer just to use the hip controller for rotation, okay, because I find it to be easier. So let's find that. So where are the hips going to be the most bent? I think the hips are going to be the most bent in the down position. So I'm going to lift the supporting leg, the supporting hip a little bit higher, and the unsupported leg a little bit lower, sort of like that. And since I'm doing this all at once, I'm also going to rotate the spine to counter that. Just about up to neutral again is all you need to do. You could go a little bit further like that so that you've got shoulders going the opposite way. But again, I find that this is maybe a little bit too much. Generally, we're just trying to stay stable in our walks. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring it back up to neutral, which is a lot more subtle. Okay. Then the opposite side. So this down position, we're going to have this hip upward and the spine countering that. Now you might wonder, why did I skip all of those other poses? Well, it's because these two positions are the only ones I really care about with regard to this part of the animation. So if we see, what attribute are we changing? Well, unfortunately, it's all three for these ribs, right? It's all three. But you can see that it's mostly Z. Okay, it will end up probably being all of them, but mostly Z. I could delete these keyframes in between to try to make this cycle work properly. Let's look at the hips. So for rotate Z, rotate Y, rotate X, it ends up being all three of them because I'm tilting forward because we're now rotating. So it's all three of those positions. So I just know that I've posed the most important part for the hips and I've just ignored everything else, and they're both in the down positions. Everything else is just going to kind of be traveling smoothly from side to side, hip out, and I just want that to repeat forever. So let's think, before I go about deleting anything, is there anything else I might want to do? The only other thing is how much forward and back lean you might want in your body. What I find here is that there is a little bit of forward-backward rotation on the hips. And I think that it tends to happen on the contacts most of all, where the hips are slightly leaned backward because you're kind of falling into this pose. And then by the passing position, they're a little bit leaned forward, just a tiny bit, because we're trying to gain that momentum back. And it's very, very small. So on our very first pose, if we're going to do that, rotate, first, be aware of what happens to your thighs. You don't want them to rapidly change position too much. So just a little bit. And then whatever this pose is, you probably want to copy it and paste it to the end pose as well. And then, uh-oh, what happened, right? We were translating, and so they're not the same. You can't copy paste. But what we can do is we can copy and paste these values here. So for our hip position, actually, we're really lucky. We've got 0, 0, and 23. I'm just going to copy that number and paste that number. So now they should be the same. If you use your keyboard keys, comma, period, you should just see no movement between the first and last. Okay? So we've got just a little bit of forward bend on the contact. I'm going to do that on this contact as well. Then a little bit of, oh wait, I just leaned it forward and I just did the opposite of what I said I was going to do. Whoops. Okay, so I said I was going to lean it back just a little bit. Copy that number, paste that number. Okay, and then we're going to lean forward a little bit on the passing pose. You can see this is straightening the leg just a little bit. I want to be aware of that. Got about 20, almost 20, 11 and a half, a little bit less, 11.5. Okay, that's going to be fine. So if I take a look at the graph, sometimes it's necessary. So here's the rotate X, which is forward to backward, the one I was just doing. Rotate X. So I've got about the same values. Rotate Y is twist, which we haven't addressed either. That's one that I really do not like to do for the entire body. I prefer to have that just on the hip controller because it messes so much up. But right now I do have a slight twist here. Not really sure what that's attributable to. I'll just leave it for now. And then for rotate Z, which is the leaning, I've got a lean here and a lean there. At this point, I feel pretty confident that I could clean up this hip motion and move on to the upper body. You can see a little bit of that hip moving. What I didn't do is adjust the spine. Now that I've rotated this forward backward, I didn't adjust the spine forward and backward at all. So I had the spine rotate up, which means at this point I would rotate it forward just a little bit to keep that lean forward. And then on this passing position, I rotated it down so it would rotate back a little bit. Just kind of keeping our body upright. I know this is very subtle, but the flexibility will be visible in motion. So we're going to lean forward just a little bit and back just a little bit. And then forward just a little bit. Now here, I need the same exact pose. You can see there it is, different. Since the spine is all rotations, not translations, I should be able to just copy and paste safely. I had something selected that I didn't mean to. Okay. Since we haven't posed these at all, that really shouldn't matter. That could have been a major problem, but our arms are just floating in space. We haven't done anything yet. So I don't think it matters that I was changing those values. Okay, there we go. They're the exact same now. Okay, so far it's going to be very jerky and strange, and I'm not going to do anything with the neck or the head yet. Okay, so let's try to clean that up now. So we've got our rotate X is this forward-backward motion, and that is actually an extreme, so it's okay for that to be a flat tangent. The only thing I typically want to do is just make this a little bit smoother. I could actually delete, I could just do that, keep this nice and simple, because we don't need those in between rotation positions. We just want it to smoothly do this one motion. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Just deleted out those keys for rotate X. Rotate Y, I don't know what's going on yet. Rotate Z is the one where it's side to side. Same sort of thing. I could delete all of these, but I want to make sure that I know where my apexes and where my passing positions are. In these three, that one and that one need to be deleted. This is the neutral position. Okay, that means this one and this one needs to be deleted, but I can't delete that because that's where the cycle resets. Okay, so I'm going to do the post infinity so I can see what's happening. This is the neutral, that's the middle position. So I'm going to take both of these and move them down. And I'm going to take both of these and rotate their tangent handle so I can try to get the smoothest interpretation possible. Now, that wasn't quite enough, so let's move it even further. And maybe I could delete this one. It does make it a little bit strangely shaped. Let's see if I can figure this out. I think I need to just shrink this tangent handle a little bit. Well, it's kind of doing it, but I've got a sort of ugly transition right here. I think this one is not really lined up the same as the other one. There we go. That looks a bit better. Okay, still a little tiny bit lumpy, but I can deal with that. Okay, as long as it's mostly smooth. And then for this one, this is the twist value. And I don't know why I've got an apex here and there. I want to see what happens if I get rid of it. So here, this is rotate in this position. That's what's happening there. And if I just delete that, what does it do? Very slight adjustment. So yeah, maybe I didn't need that. I don't know why it's even doing it. I could just zero it. Oh, sorry. In this one, I selected here. That value would actually be here, not over here. I needed to go to the point in time if I wanted to adjust it. So let's go to that point in time to make sure that visually it doesn't look crazy. Yeah, it was just a slight adjustment. Maybe I just misclicked or something. So now this is completely neutral, and I'll do the twisting with the hip controller and the ribs. I just don't want this to be doing anything. So look at the head. Look how crazy the head is, right? That's what I mean by all of these rotations will add up. The reason it looks so frenetic is because I haven't smoothed the rib rotations yet. But if we ignore that and just look at the hips, they look nice and smooth because I've cleaned them up. Okay, so we do want to be careful. All right, so one last look. If everything appears to be cycling properly, that one we haven't changed, that's fine. Yes, yes, and close enough. Okay, so now we can do the ribs. And all I really want to do is make sure that each of the motions that I've set is just doing the same thing. Now we do have 3 different objects here. So we want to make sure to select the same channel for all 3. Rotate X, X, and X, and make sure that you know that this line here, this is overlapped 3 times. So if you just single click and move something, there's 2 more copies beneath it. So you do have to click and drag every time you do something when you're editing multiple lines. Otherwise, you're going to mess stuff up. So we have an apex, 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 and a bunch of passing positions, but we'll just do that. We'll just delete all those passing positions. That way, with respect to rotating forward and backward, we should just get a smooth interpretation from here to here, from there to there, which is just going to keep it a lot less complicated. This is bending and unbending the body, and it's almost invisible. All right, let's see. So here was the Y that I didn't want anything to be happening to. So here, I'm just going to select inside the graph editor and type in 0 in the second field. That's the value. This is the frame. Same thing here. So we shouldn't get any twisting on the spine yet. I don't want to delete these keys though, because we are probably going to end up twisting the spine somewhere. And then rotate Z. This one was intentional. This is the side to side. Okay, and so the same thing we did before, we can delete this and this. This one, that's the passing. This is the reset. So we select these lines, post-infinity cycle so that we can see it, grab these keyframes, try to move them into what is going to end up making an appropriate amount of rotation. I'm going to do them separate this time. There we go. So I can just visually line that up. Adjust this. Adjust this. And that's probably fine. Let's go see. We're looking at the shoulders. And yeah, it doesn't look like anything super inappropriate. Just a little bit of flexing. It's a little hard to isolate with all these arms flopping around and stuff like that, but you can see the hips moving and the chest relatively stable, which is kind of what we were after. Okay. Now, if you do too good of a job with this and the chest is perfectly stable and the hips are moving all over the place, that is the maximum amount of feminine that you can have. Now, if you have the shoulders moving more than the hips, that's more masculine, just so that you're aware of the difference. And like I said, I'm going to show animated, when I complete it, a difference between feminine and masculine walks. Okay, so our chest and hips are moving now. Let's go ahead and pose the shoulders and the arms. So starting again at our contact position, I'm going to go ahead and click save on walk number 2, and I'll increment the save as well. Save it as walk number 3. Okay. If we take a look at our chart again, we can see what happens with the arms. The widest position for the arms tends to be on the down, and the one where it's tucked in at the sides tends to be passing position, sometimes up or in between here somewhere. And then we've got sort of a relaxed position for the contacts where it's sort of reversing. Okay, and here it is overlapped. I like to use the spread out one for this. So I'm going to start with the contact just because it's sort of habit for me, just knowing that down is going to be further away from the center of the body. All right, so for our contact positions, whatever the legs are doing, the arms are doing the opposite. Okay, so first, let's lower the arms, bring them in closer to the body, and rotate on Z so that they're straight up and down. I'm going to do this for both. Okay, so that what will end up being forward and backward is generally going to be rotate Y. What's going to end up being in and out from the body is generally going to end up being Z. What's going to end up being twist is generally going to be translate or rotate X. Okay, right now it looks like he's a gunslinger with his arms so far out. But remember, whatever is happening on the red side of the body, the opposite is happening on the red side of the arms. So this one should be behind the body. We've got to move it a little bit closer, probably a little bit lower, like that. And in general, when you're swinging your arms, the front arm can cross across the center line of the body more easily. The back, it's hard for you to twist your arm around behind your own back unless something really weird is happening. So the rear arm will be further out to the side, and the front arm will be crossed across the body a little bit more, maybe even entirely. Okay. So I'm going to move this in front of the body like that, and I'm taking a look at the chart to sort of straighten out the elbows a bit. And then the hands, I'm going to bring this one up to kind of line up with the wrist and twist it a bit over and tuck it in, kind of like that. Okay. For this backhand, I'm going to rotate it back in line with the wrist a little bit, maybe even a little bit more. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit outward like that, so it's sort of cupping around the body. So I'm trying to aim the palms in towards the center just a little bit each time. Okay. If you flip the wrists out, that tends to look more feminine. If you tuck them in or ball the fists, it tends to look more masculine. You know, we're also going to go ahead and give the fingers a pose right now at the very start of the animation, and then possibly delete all the other keyframes unless we're going to do something special on a pose. The finger poses, by the way, are accessible from the back of the hand for Goon. Each of the rigs has its own way. For easy, quick, just kind of relaxed hands, I'm going to use on both of them the master cup to move the pinky a little bit further down. So cup splays out the fingers like this. So I'm going to move the pinky just a little bit and then do master grip to just collapse the fingers in. So we've got a more collapsed pinky and a less collapsed pointer finger. Then for the thumbs, we've got master thumb grip. I'm going to go ahead and just turn that up a little bit. And that's about all you need for just a general relaxed hand. But I also like to make sure the thumb tips are angled just a little bit out, and usually I'll put the base down just a little bit further. Possibly rotate it, but that's fine. Those are relaxed enough hands. All the other poses right now are flat platter hands. Okay, so I'm just going to delete all of those. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a keyframe on our very last frame just for the fingers so that it's kept as sort of a bookmark that we've got those poses twice. And then if I ever want to repose, like to unfold or refold the fingers during the walk, I'll just check what frame it's on and go to that frame and put a keyframe. All right. So for our wrists, we've got this first pose down. None of these other positions are really helping. In fact, they're going to force me to again and again and again move the arms down, rotate them the same way. And that's going to end up causing a lot more work than I need to do, and possibly animation errors. In fact, you can see in the graph editor this is what it looks like right now. So I'm going to do the same thing for the wrists. I'm going to delete all of these poses. And I'm going to go ahead and just key this very last position. But remember what we did with our offsetting. We're going to have to move these forward to match exactly how far we've moved in our animation. So here are our wrists. Here's the last frame. First frame, last frame, first frame, last frame, first frame, last frame. Just trying to get it as close as I can. There we go. First, last frame, last frame. I can move it just a tiny bit forward. There we go. Indistinguishable now. Okay. So try to do a good job posing those wrists on your first contact because you're going to have to translate them. I'm going to say right now, we haven't done anything with the shoulders. We're going to have to change something, but this is just as an example. I'm going to pose the arms entirely, then we're going to involve the shoulders and the rotation of the body, and we'll have to fix everything, so don't get too attached to any of these. Now, we don't have any keyframes in here to keep track of. Oh, and also look at this. The arms are easing in and easing out, so it's like he's carrying an invisible pole or something like that. That's okay. We'll fix that in just a little while. I'm going to do the same thing we did in our first pass, which is that on our contact pose, I'm going to invert these arms. I'm going to make the opposite ones forward and backward. So here we go. This one needs to be behind the body and a little bit further out. We go ahead and rotate this for the palm to face somewhat in. Just behind the body. Let's see. And I'll go ahead and do that. And then this one needs to be forward, crossing across the body somewhat. Something like this. And then we can check the difference between our two poses just to make sure it's relatively the same. Okay, close enough. Okay, so then we want to take a look at our chart and see what other poses do we need to do. The passing position is going to be important. This is where one arm is traveling back and the other is traveling forward, but we don't even have our extreme yet. Our down position is our extreme, really. So let's try to do the down position first. We check one of our other controllers. If we forget what number it's on 4. Okay, so 4 and on 18. Keep in mind also that when I posed these wrists, I didn't hit S. I didn't key everything. I probably should. Since we're doing our first blocking, I should probably be hitting S each time to make sure that I'm not leaving out any channels accidentally, which can happen. Okay, so on number 4, this one, this front arm, needs to be at its most extreme. I like to interpret that not just as forward, but also across. And in some ways, the wrist starts to reverse and kind of drag behind also. So I like to bring it in and across like this a bit, rather than just extending it further and further out forward. Okay, so there is what I think of as the front extreme. For the back one, this arm is going to be at its most extended, but it tends to be a little bit straighter and I think lower too. So let's see. Yeah, I'm going to make it straighter and a bit lower. It's starting to travel forward. So this one actually didn't move very much at all, but I think that's okay for the back arm. That looks nice to me. All right, let's go to 18 and do the same thing. Wait, did I hit S? Let's make sure I hit S. Let's go to 18. I'm going to just grab them both and hit S right away so I don't forget. All right, so this front arm, a little bit further out, across. I tend to go a bit up. And rotating the wrist inward and upward a bit. Yeah, almost like he's holding something invisible in front of himself. Okay, like that. And then for the opposite arm, a little bit further back, a little bit lower. And I didn't really do anything in or out. I'm trying to think. I tend to think that the arms sweep out and around and then come back out and around. But I didn't really take that into account when I did this one. Okay, so I could move the contact pose inward so that this one can be outward, but then I have to copy paste it. So I'll just make a note. I'm going to have to do that. Same thing here. I'm going to move this one a little bit inward so that the next one can be a little bit more out. Okay, looking at where this wrist is relative to the hips. Okay, a little bit flatter, straighter. Okay, since I'm swinging it outward, I'm curling this in just a little bit and also going to kind of straighten the hand. Okay. All right. So that'll do for those extreme positions. Now we have the passing positions for the arms. On this chart, we have the passing position for the arms and legs happening at the same time. I don't really like that. I prefer to kind of move it to the up position, but we'll try to follow this chart as much as possible. You can make your own determination if you want to change the position of that, and you should do it through observation of people as well. Don't just like watch your animation and decide. Watch people walk and decide where you think it should go. So we're going to do it on frame 8 here. Now, what matters most is the direction the arm is traveling. This blue arm was in front of the body, and now it's traveling backward. Well, that means it's got the benefit of the elbow bend. Okay, elbows can't bend backwards. They can only bend forward. So we're going to rotate this hand out a little bit, up a little bit, and at this point, we probably need to use, we're not using the pole vectors, we use the elbow twist. If the elbows are facing outward, way out here, and it looks kind of strange, I like to bend them back in a little bit more towards the body. So this one's traveling backward, like that. So it can be a lot more bent than the one that's traveling forward. Okay, that might not be where I end up. I'm just going to leave that for the moment. Here's the one that's traveling forward. Let me hit S. The one that's traveling forward is kind of fighting the elbow joint, and so it doesn't have the benefit of bending as much. So it's going to be a lot flatter and sharper down to the body. But like I said, I think it rotates out a little bit too, so I'm going to put it out like that, sort of a more straightly held arm. I do want to bend it just a little, and I'll go ahead and elbow twist just a little to bring that elbow back in. Yeah, so this one is a straight arm traveling forward. This one is a bent arm traveling backward. Okay, so then we're going to want to do the same thing on the opposite side. Notice this time I'm kind of going to the first half, then the second half, and the first half and the second half, because we're trying to mirror these poses. So this is sort of a way that I do it with the arms, try to help myself out. All right, so the red arm now is the one traveling backward, swinging back, so it has the benefit of its elbow. Move it back just a little bit. Want to definitely twist that elbow so that it's leading the action back. Something like that. Take a look at my other passing position. Yeah, I'm about the level of the hips, kind of held upright. Something like that. Okay. And then for the opposite, this one's traveling forward, and so it's sort of fighting the elbow bend a bit more. So I'm going to check. I'm just behind the hip here on the opposite side. I'm going to try to get somewhat like that, and of course twisting and traveling away from the center of the body. There we go. So it can swing out and around and up. Might have the wrist trailing like this just a little bit. The floppier this wrist is, the weirder it looks, but a little bit of that is appropriate. It's not unusual for people to maintain a little bit of muscle tension, even in like their wrists or their fingers, but a little bit of that could be appropriate. Okay, so we've got those. And now the last one would be here on the up pose. I feel like the up pose, it's one of the least descriptive parts of this arm swing, but we'll just kind of do our best because although it's past its middle position, it's arriving at almost the contact and almost the extreme. So this one, I feel like it has less character oftentimes, but we'll try to do our best. Let's make sure we get the right frame number. So 25 on the opposite. And 11 over here. So taking a look at one at a time, the red wrist is going from back, out, forward, and is almost going to cross over the body. Okay. One of the benefits of having deleted all of those keyframes is that now we're getting for free the in-between position each time, which usually it's not right, but at least it's in the ballpark where you can now adjust it and make better choices. So I'm going to move this a little bit further forward to kind of hurry through that center swing. And you can see it starts to rotate and then place up. All of these positions will need to coordinate eventually into a nice gradual smooth arc, but you won't exactly know where those positions are until you've already animated some of it. So don't be too picky about this just yet. Get it generally correct and then use the graph editor and especially flipping through the positions to try to perfect it. So I think that's close enough really for that one. Let's do the opposite side forward and then we'll do the back for each side. So up and in a little bit. And we can see that one's different. We'll copy and paste things once we're ready to go. Okay. All right, that'll basically do it for that one. Now let's do the back arm for both sides. So for this one, now the red arm has just swung back, and it's going to end up kind of behind there. So bring it back to about here. Start to straighten out the wrist a little bit. Could probably keep it just a little bit further forward than that. Okay, there we go. Kind of that in-between position. Let's see from the front. It's just sort of rounding around the body. That's okay. Let's do the other one. The blue, same sort of thing. Bring this back into line. Check its position. Feel like I can bend this a little bit further forward. And I want to move it just a little bit out. Okay, feel all right about that. Okay, then last thing we want to do, check that our contact pose is the same front and back, and it's not. It actually looks like I only changed this wrist. And maybe I only changed one value. No, I changed two values. So I changed X and Z. So that's enough to say that I should probably just copy it and adjust it. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, copied and adjusted. Move it back into position. And then check. It's way off. So this is frame 1. This is frame, whoops, wrong way. Frame 29. One, 29, 1, 29, 1, 29, 1, 29, 1. That's close enough. We're not going to see any difference. Okay. Some little hiccups and weird things happening with the arms, probably due to tangent handles because I did copy and paste a bunch. But generally doing the right thing. Okay. Just really quick because I don't like to have that continue. Just select those. Hit F to frame everything. Zoom out. And just hit auto tangents one more time. Just to cancel out any of that stuff. Probably it's not going to fix it entirely, but that's all right. All right, close enough. Now we need the shoulders to be able to do something while this is happening. Minimal shoulder rotation is more feminine. More shoulder rotation is more masculine. And we have 0. Okay. Now on every rig, you're going to have actual shoulder controllers. And that's more for the relationship of the shoulder, the clavicle to the rib cage. What I'm talking about is the displacement of the shoulder. And that has to do with your ribs rotating step by step or flexing side to side step by step. Okay. We already kind of did the side to side swaying, which you can kind of see. It's pretty subtle. And so the translation of the shoulders is kind of coming from the hips only right now. But what we need to do is rotate. And that might end up messing up some of our animation, but it's okay. In general, the rotation of the shoulders is going to match the maximum position of the hand. So here, where blue is forward, red is back, what I want to do is rotate the shoulder so that the blue shoulder is forward and the red shoulder is back. Okay? And the opposite with the other extreme on 18. So I'm just going to rotate. Really hard to see things here. So the red shoulder is forward, the blue shoulder is back. How much you do this is down to how exaggerated you want it to be. I wouldn't go beyond what I'm doing right here unless you're going for a character walk. Okay? It could definitely be less than I'm doing right now. The thing is, as I just did those things, it probably messed up the arm positions a bit. So now this forward arm position is maybe not far enough. We can move it out a little bit further because we can reach further. And this blue position might not be far enough. Although in that case, I think it kind of is. I'll go ahead and move it back just a tiny bit more because this one's typically less exaggerated. The same thing on 4. It's going to be a little bit further now. And this one could be, actually that one looks fine. I'm going to leave that one. Let's also think about what we want the shoulder controllers to do, not just the ribs. Do we want them to be flexing while this is happening? Yeah, we kind of do. Backward is less comfortable for people, so go easy on that one. Forward is far easier. So if you move that forward just a little bit, then you get a little extra motion. And then you can push this even further away from the body because it can reach even farther. Let's do this with the red one as well. Move that forward, move this one forward. And with the blue one as well. You might think that this doesn't matter. It does. You can definitely see all of these subtle actions in motion. Everything is more apparent when it's in motion. The up down of the shoulders matters a lot too. Okay, and that one, gratefully, we don't have to use the ribs so much for. We want to think, when do we want the shoulders to rise and fall? When the arm is being dragged forward, like this one right here, I think is a good time to have the shoulder flex a little bit. There it finally goes, right there. But in this case, we've got all of our default values, and we've only got them changed on frame 4 and frame 18. We don't even have a value for our neutral positions, for contacts. So I'm going to go ahead and take, in this contact position, and rotate the shoulder back, and rotate this shoulder forward. And on our opposite, rotate the shoulder back a little bit, rotate the shoulder forward a little bit. I don't think I'm going to change the hand positions for that. And let's see, I would have to copy paste that to my last frame as well. Go ahead and grab them. These ones don't move through space, so you can just copy paste. There we go. Okay. And then we may have to start going through and deleting keys in order to get a smoother motion to see what it is we're doing. So as the arm travels backwards, I feel like that side is going to have a lower shoulder. Let's see, the hip is high, so it would actually be bending in this direction. Well, let's just go with it. I'll say a lower shoulder on this side and a higher one on this side. I'm going to tend to just try to oppose the shoulders. Whatever it is I'm doing on one side, I'm going to try to do the other, even though technically you can shrug both of them and move both of them forward if you want to. Just in a walk, I'm just trying to balance it out. So that's in the passing position. So I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite passing position. I'll move, I don't even remember what I did. So it was down for the one traveling backward and up for the one traveling forward. Okay. So I'm going to open the graph editor now and sort of clean up everything that I've done. Here it is. Okay. So let's grab the rotates of X. There's nothing. That's nice. Rotates of Y. You can see they're slightly different. That's fine most of the time. We just want to try to get only the important stuff. I didn't set any positions here, so I'm going to delete those. And I set an extreme and an extreme here and here. So something like that. Now they're not exactly doing the same thing. I sort of like that that happens. I probably just made a mistake. But if they're going to do things at slightly different times, it's going to feel a little bit more organic, a little bit more real. Sometimes it can introduce hiccups and problems, but I tend to not resist that too much and just allow it to happen. What I do want is to set them all back to default tangents because I didn't have any eases there. This is the forward-backward position. So we can see it's happening at slightly different times. There is an elbow pop here. This is what I mean by an elbow pop. Between that position and this one, the arm hyperextends and then catches up and pops back again. That is definitely something to fix in our polish paths. But for now, I'm going to not be concerned. Let's take a look at rotate Z. Okay, definitely have two apexes there and a bunch of, we don't really care very much. Here, here, here. This we have to keep because this is the cycle, but we want to change the tangent handles so that it's smoother. And if we're really concerned, we can view post-infinity. That's close enough, I think. I'm too much of a perfectionist. I want to see. Okay, a little bit more like that. And for this one, change this one again. There we go. All right. So let's see what the shoulders are doing. This one didn't actually have any animation. I think if you hit F to frame, oh, sorry, I'm on my wrong screen. Rotate X didn't have any animation. If you hit F to frame, you can see if anything moves. You could delete all that or just leave it. Let's see. They appear to be hitting some invisible barriers, which I don't like. Whack, 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 forward and backward. So I want to find out what's going on there. Oftentimes, the best way to do that is to drag through your animation. Okay, so here, it's changing too quickly. Okay, so I can see that I think it's rotate Y is changing too quickly and also just kind of hitting an extreme. Is that rotate Y? Yeah, I mean, it must be, or it could be down to my ribs. So at this point, your ribs will start to have a bigger impact. Oh, did I ever polish that? Ah, okay. So I never polished the animation curve for my ribs twisting after I made that change. Here we can see there were some new keyframes introduced. Here were some new keyframes introduced, but I didn't do anything about this, and I was about to blame it on the shoulder control. Hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here. The blue shoulder control seems to be smacking into some invisible barrier front and back. Whack, whack, whack. Because there's other bits of the body that are adding into that motion, I was attributing it to the wrong thing, and that's pretty easy to do sometimes. So what we want to do is fix this animation curve instead. Let's see, so this one is kind of neutral. That one should be lower. By the way, when I'm moving these, I'm holding down Shift and middle mouse to drag directly up and down. Don't just middle mouse drag. You can accidentally go to another keyframe. Be careful about that. Okay, I'm going to show the post infinity. You can go ahead and get rid of this and then try to make sure this tangent handle is generally aiming in the right direction. I think it actually needs to be lower still. There we go. Just about like that. Okay, that should help. There we go. So now there's a softer reversal front and back with that shoulder. It's no longer smacking into a barrier. However, because rotates are oftentimes kind of more complicated, I have introduced keyframes onto these other values that we can just delete. We don't need these to hold any important position. So same thing for Z. You can see there's keyframes introduced right here. We don't really need. Wow, what's happening here in the oh, okay, yeah, that's the infinity. That's okay. Let's take that one though, and make sure that we are a little bit more smooth in our approach. A little bit more. There we go. Okay, so that should have helped a good deal. There we go. Much smoother shoulders. Pay no attention to the wrist and elbows because we're only paying attention to that shoulder right now. So now you can see he just appears a little bit more active and conscious now that his shoulders are shrugging and moving as we're walking. It is a slightly better animation practice to offset that motion a bit, as if the shoulders are leading the action. That would mean moving it in time a little bit. But right now we're kind of approaching this in the easiest, plainest way. But if I were to try to polish this even more, I would sort of try to make this shoulder shrug happen on this previous pose. So this one where it's going forward would happen sooner and sort of drag the arm along with it. And then when it starts moving back, I would definitely want that to happen sooner. In fact, I don't really like the fact that it stays so far forward for so long at all. That is the rotate Y. Oh, it's kind of cool. I'm looking at the chart. They have it opposed so that I've got both of them selected and I can just kind of rotate them together. That's really convenient. So I could move that back like that. And you can see that made a very big difference. And then it hits its extreme back there. It's funny, I'm not really even seeing that extreme. I see it back here. Not sure why that's necessary, but it seemed to have improved the look of the thing. Got some sort of weird asymmetry in my posing. I'd have to look through to see why I have that, but that feels a lot better with that one pose moved so far down. Very odd. I think I might reduce it just a little bit, huh? Yeah, there's definitely something weird going on with that shoulder that I would have to kind of sleuth out to find out what's happening. Possibly something weird happening with ribs or offset. Oh, I do see one pose is different from the other. Their apexes are happening at different places. Or maybe even with the hips that I've not yet addressed. Well, not really seeing it at the moment, but we'll just go ahead and move on with the other things that we're doing. So we're getting closer. We do still have a little bit of a flicking problem with the arms. Okay, it's not in the reset of the cycle, but probably in some tangent handle that's inappropriately set or something like that. We want to try to make the arms travel smoothly at this point, okay, because we've got the core of the body set. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save at that point. And I think I'll actually iterate the number now. There we go. And I'm going to try to focus on one side at a time, making the arm travel smoothly through the air. Okay. So just watching the motion here. It's coming backward, hitting an extreme, traveling forward. Okay. So we definitely need the graph editor for this sort of editing. We need to look at first the translates, then the rotates. So here we've got translate X, which is in and out from the body. Translate Y, which is up and down. Translate Z, which is forward and back. And Z, keep in mind, is the hardest one because the whole body is traveling forward through space. So it does look different. Right away, though, I can see there's a big difference right there, which maybe is going to be part of the problem. Interesting. All right, so Z and Y are going to be easier to try to solve first. Here the wrist is in front of the body, traveling back, and probably not far enough down, and maybe too far in Z. Crossing the body. I'm going to bring it down further. Okay. This one could reasonably come a little bit further down. Actually, let's leave it up a little tiny bit. Okay. That one is hyperextending. I can see that. So let's raise that. Forward. And then this position, I think I need this to be higher and further forward. Maybe not. I'm looking at that part. It does do a very weird kind of path there, though. Okay, so at this point, we've got an animation tool that might help us. Let's see how well it works with this offsetting, though. I'm going to go to the animation menu. And I think this is in Visualize, Editable Motion Trail. For IK handles, this is ideal because IK handles are literally traveling through space. For things like your ribs or your fingers, this would not work. Editable Motion Trail, I'm going to open the option box. This option of Use Anchor Transform tries to isolate the object compared to the rest of the animation, which is undesirable for our case, so you need to leave that off. I would recommend including show frame numbers. You can either use time slider or start end. I switched that in an attempt to change it, but it doesn't really matter. So when we hit create, there we go. There's our motion trail. And this will help us to visualize where this is moving through space. It can be helpful for a number of different parts of the body, but particularly wrists and feet, and sometimes even the head if you've got a lot of additive motions altogether. The great thing about this for IK handles, though, is that this is an editable motion trail, meaning that if I click on this frame and then move this, that will now travel to that position. It changed the keyframe for me. So that can be very, very helpful. You can also see the tangents change in real time as long as you've got an editable motion trail. If you want to get rid of this, you can just select it and click delete, or the motion trail handle is in the outliner over here. Initially, when I clicked that button, it was a child of this object, so I had to hit Shift to open this up and scroll all the way down, or hit F to focus and find its child to delete it, which was kind of annoying. So as long as you don't do that, it should appear right here at the top. You can just hit delete and get rid of it. Okay. So let's go ahead and use that, though, to try to polish this motion. Now you can see as it travels, there's this big hiccup that's happening between the end of the animation and the start of the animation. There's this big sharp area, which is strange. So we want to try to explain that. So let's look at our graph and we can see, oh, you know what? Our graph doesn't have tangents that match up. Whoa, why did it suddenly grab everything? I didn't want it to do that. Translate. Okay, that's very weird. So apparently the graph editor is acting strange because I'm using a editable motion handle as opposed to just clicking directly on my object and going into the graph editor. So I guess be aware of that if you're still selecting the motion handle when you're trying to isolate areas of the graph editor and look at individual curves, it's going to start rebelling and acting weird. So just be careful what your selection is. Anyway, post infinity cycle. I want to view infinity. Don't know how that got turned off. There we go. And for translate Y, but not really for Z. Z doesn't really help. But we want to look at, yep, there's this big sharp valley here. And for X, there's just a really bad motion handle. So we can try to solve it like that, or we can look at what's going on with Y, but all of this together is giving us more information about how to solve this very strange animation hiccup that we've got here. So really, when I look at this, I'm not even sure why we're coming back into this position. I suppose at some point it was a good idea. Doesn't seem like a good idea now. So I just want to change this position. I can either click on these dots and move them around, or I can go to the appropriate time and the timeline and move the object around. So we want this to travel back. The backward position looks great. And then forward and come to rest here. Okay. So that one might be fine. This one's probably the issue. So I can move this further back and out. Probably want to delay the wrist a little bit like that as well. Okay. Then definitely the tangents are not spectacular with this one. But let's move this a little bit further forward and outward. And I'll worry about matching them up after the fact, because the tangent is the thing here. The tangent is definitely not helping. So I want to make sure I'm on my object itself. And it seems like translate Y is very, very strange, but that shouldn't be the one that's causing this issue, because I can see that it's coming sideways, not up and down. Hello. That's a little weird too. Oh yeah, now it's traveling up when I don't want it to. Let's bring that down. You can see I'm on frame 25 and I moved the curve and the arm doesn't move. You just need to scrub through or play and then it will update. So just make sure you're aware of that. Okay, so I can see the whole body is moving upward, which is probably why that was higher. At this point, I should just be using the diamond. Yeah, to keep the relative bend in the arm. That makes sense. But yeah, by this point, we're like hyperextending our arm. I'm going to raise this up a bit so that doesn't happen. And then let's see what happens after the fact. I think this one's traveling back too quickly. I'm going to leave that out there for longer so that it has the opportunity to reverse. And let's raise this up a little bit more as well. Okay, so everything's working fine except for that transition. So now let's copy and paste this position to frame 1. Yeah, I'll just copy the whole thing. It's going to be wrong, obviously, but I'll move it back into its position. There we go. So that's the right position. But as you can see, the curves are still acting very, very strange. Okay. There are some slightly odd things happening here. All right, let's go ahead and just grab all of these and set them back to default tangents to begin with. That almost helped. You can see right here at 29, there's just one frame where it just hooks back like that. It's almost a smooth motion, almost. So that could be this right here. Probably we don't want it to slow down and stop. Z motion is the one traveling forward through real space. So it would make sense if the culprit is Z. I'm going to delete that one. Probably don't need it. This one's okay. I'm just going to continue it going out there. This is the actual reversal. When I hit F to frame everything properly. I don't like how weird and wild these tangents are, but I don't really see anything I can do about it at the moment. This one is clearly wrong. Should be doing something like that. Okay, so let's hope that, there we go. Now it looks nice and smooth. You can see the curve immediately. Let's watch it play. Okay. So some combination of tangent handles was making that very, very odd. Now we do have this sharp corner. See on frame 4 there. We want that to be a lot smoother and rounder. And right now it is very sharp. And so it just looks like the hand smacks into a wall. Whereas back here it reverses nice and smoothly. So let's take a look at frame 4. Translate Z is probably going to be playing a role here. Okay. And frame 8 as well. So we can try to see, why is it, perhaps that. That rounded it out just a little already. So what we're doing is delaying the translate Y position a little higher for longer. He's kind of smacking his arm down now, which I don't really like. I'm going to move him forward and higher so that it's softer. And let's delay that wrist a little bit more. Still not there, but feeling better now. So for a little while, you can see that the graph's getting all messed up and weird. I do just focus on the viewport and what's happening in space, and then we'll go back into the graph to see if there's anything else I can do to help. Okay, the fact that on frame 8 this comes back out as quickly as possible, that is definitely part of the problem. And I think that the rotations on 8 also should be more like this. So the hand is still pointing back where it came from again. Okay, so I've moved translate X, I've moved translate Y quite a bit, translate Z I've adjusted a few times, and we still don't have a very good handle here. I'm sort of recalling that maybe we can show the tangent handles right out here on this line. Maybe not. Show the frames. Show in-out tangents. Yes, we can. Ooh. Oh, that could be very, very helpful. And then show in-bead, out-bead, modify keys. I thought we already were modifying the keys. So I don't know what that means, but we're already doing that part. Ooh, seems like it really didn't like the fact, it didn't like the fact that I moved this position on frame 1 at all. So unfortunately, now I've got to disconnect here. Okay, we'll try that again in a moment. Let me fix this up. Having a lot of errors and weird things happening during this session, but hey, I just rather you guys see this so that if you run into the same thing, then you can fix it. Okay, so now that I've got interesting in-out tangents, that is a very odd tangent. Can I do anything about this? This does not seem to function very well, to be honest. I thought maybe this would be a help, but wow, those are very strange directions they're picking for those tangents. I thought it would make a little bit more sense. I'm going to try to see if I can force it to be helpful. Wow. That's maybe the wrong way. Oh. Okay, actually, now that I'm wrestling with it a little bit, it does seem to be helping somewhat, but I have to be very, very careful. And I'm still getting some odd, unexplainable positions. Like, I don't know why that's dipping back that way. Huh. This is kind of fascinating. I've not really used these motion trail handles in this way before. Let's take a look. Okay, so now some of these handles in the graph editor don't quite look correct. Okay. Smooth enough. Okay, these look completely bad, but some of them might be necessary. So like this one, I don't like it when tangent handles go beyond the key that you set, but if that's helping in this case, good. If not, and I think it's not, it may be creating an error. So I'm going to make that one a flat one. And this one, I'm going to reduce that. But have I reintroduced the problem? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, so we'll keep going there. This one. Some of these, they make the line, the graph, look very lumpy. I'm not entirely sure if they're necessary, but because we've got this built-in motion with the body, they may be necessary. I'm still looking at this part, though. Translate X. Seems to have some issue. Hard to tell. That line is not exactly updating every time I make a change in the graph editor. Translate Z. Aha. There is a rather ugly handle in Translate Z. Ah, there we go. Okay, so that was some of the issue, but we're back to that sharpness. Now, although when we look three-dimensionally, it's not all that sharp. But I was looking to at least soften it in this direction, this X direction a little bit. Strangely, it doesn't always seem to be corresponding to X. Like, I look at the X value, and that's nice and smooth and soft. So why isn't it showing it that way in full motion? Kind of curious. So I could make, well, maybe I need to delay this for longer. So if I slow down this tangent handle a little bit like that, sometimes this can be the answer. I would really like to see both sides at the same time. What I'm doing is making it linger here in this middle position just a little bit longer. Do that without becoming a full stop. And so this graph doesn't always update right away, but did that help? Now it's creating more of a linger over here. Okay, so let's undo. That would be more like over here. Maybe widen that out. Still not quite. It's probably because of the interaction of translate Z. That one's the hardest one to predict because we're moving forward in space. So at this point, maybe we need to flatten this one out a little bit. No. Maybe it needs to travel a little bit faster. No. I don't know. Sometimes, so if this gets frustrating enough, right? Here's what I sometimes do, is I will just take the object on different various frames and just frame by frame animate it exactly where I would want it to go. So I'll take this one over here, this one over here, and just push in three-dimensional space in every single position. And you can do that. You can frame by frame animate in Maya if you really want to. And then you don't have to worry about tangents quite as much. And you get a lot of fine-grained control. The problem is you get a lot of fine-grained control. That can be a curse more than a blessing. Let's take a look and see. Have I helped this motion? So now I can at least see that I've got a nicer, smoother, softer turnaround. I'm just going to be very picky about it. Let's keep. There we go. That going. Okay. So now when it plays, I've got a very smooth action at the front of this hand. And what we can do now is see what was the answer in the graph editor that I wasn't finding. So it looks like this needed an overhand curve. It had one before. This tangent's messed up because I put so many in. You can ignore that. This is frame 7, that's frame 8. This won't be visible except for in motion blur. Here's translate Y. So it looks like this just needed a soft in out tangent, maybe a little bit sharper than I expected at the beginning of Y. And translate Z, or what's translate X. So you can kind of just see this is the extreme. There's a linear motion. I think it was that translate Y had a sharper motion than I anticipated. Kind of interesting. So I can delete that and these. That should be appropriate. This one I think already was. That one was doing fine. I forget where my necessary handle was. I think probably that one will keep. What I'm trying to do now is recreate with the graph what I created by just making a bunch of keys. That's fine. Okay. So that should be all three. Let's see. And it looks fine. So why I couldn't arrive at that before, I don't know. Sometimes your brain just doesn't work. Sometimes you overlook something important. But now, that motion at the very least looks smoother. But this is why editable motion trail exists, so that we can grab these individual parts and move them around in real space, add more keys if we need to, visualize what it is that we're not seeing when it's playing back, because sometimes it can be very hard to judge that. Okay. So we've basically gone through the entire figure except for fine-tuning the head and neck. We could do all of this same process on the other hand. I don't want to force you to watch me go through that again, but it's generally the same sort of process where we try to make the curves look nice. We try to respect the fact that the shoulder is moving around and the arm needs to bend and unbend in a pattern. I'm not really happy with this animation entirely just yet, but mostly it has to do with the overlap on the wrist now, that I want it to have a nice soft reversal of where the fingers are facing, and we haven't even dealt with that aspect yet. Okay, but that would be another entire pass where I would be dealing with the rotates instead of the translates to try to get the fingers in hand to reverse around with some nice overlap. Okay. So then finally with the head and neck, let's just go on to that little last bit. I'll go ahead and click save. And remember, we can delete this motion trail handle if it's annoying. Finally with the head and neck, if we go ahead and play, we can see that the neck right now is just following everything that the shoulders and the rest of the body is doing. But the head is just kind of holding steady, which looks a little bit strange, the fact that it's just not moving at all. So to start with, the neck is just kind of holding the head in position. So I like to watch from the back shoulders. As the body moves to the left, it's very likely that the neck will bend the opposite way a little bit as the head mass just kind of trails behind. So we've just dropped down to the right a little bit. So it's probable that the neck is going to lean left just a little bit. Here we're in the passing position, up, and now we're in contact and down. Down is probably where the neck will be as extreme, although the contacts will have a little bit. So same thing here on this contact. I'm going to bend it to the left just a tiny bit, and then over here, of course, we need to match that value, which we can just copy and paste. So we'll just copy, paste, and forward and backward also. So that would be translate X. As the body drops down, probably the head will be delayed a little bit, so it would bend backward. And then as we push upward, the neck may bend forward just a little bit as the head kind of drags down. So here we've got down. I'll go a little bit back, just a tiny bit. And then up, we'll go a bit forward. And now we'll take a look at the graph editor and try to smooth out all those motions. These all look okay, except for the first and last ones, which need to be more linear. I should probably be viewing post-infinity. By the way, you can do pre-infinity also, if you want to see it over on this side. Just so I can see. There we go. I want this one higher. So that would be the forward to backward. Here's rotate. Try not to twist the neck, just leave that to the head. And then here's the side to side rotation, which I can see. Basically, slightly offset in the motion of the body. So that, I don't know why the post-infinity is not visible here. There we go. About like that. Okay, let's see how it looks. We've got just a little bit of forward backward here. A little bit of side to side there. That looks much better. Okay, the X value though did not look great. I feel like I maybe did something wrong there. Let's see. So there was such a huge amount of movement back here that I feel like the neck needed to be delayed longer to soften the motion of the head. Okay. And again, this can be kind of hard to judge sometimes. And probably I'm getting too picky about it. Generally, if you watch the figure from a small distance and it looks smooth, you can kind of consider that to be a success for video games. Close up, it's going to be unlikely that we're going to have our camera just locked onto this character in a game. Okay. So then finally, just as a little secondary motion thing, I would grab the head and I would try to make him sort of nod and bend his head side to side just a little bit to give it a bit of extra motion and also the direction that the nose is facing. So since he is locked, we're going to tilt his chin up as he descends and down as he comes to the top. Back to neutral, probably here, up. Down. Back to neutral. All right. So sometimes you can see how much further I push something compared to the others. Bring that back down to a more reasonable. We don't really need that one. And these ones, again, need to be more linear. We can try this one motion at a time, or do them all. So this is best viewed from the side, probably. You can see just a little bit of flopping up and down on the nose. You can actually constrain geometry if you want to get really picky. Why not? Let's just show you how to get really picky. I'm going to put a sphere and give him a clown nose. I saw this, or was taught this trick when I was in school. I always thought it was a really clever way to track things, but you just put a little clown nose on here. Just like that. We could even hide this geometry if we wanted to, or make it very small so it's not so exaggerated. And I'm just going to constrain this to the head controller. So constrainer, constrained, parent, with offset, by the way. Maintain offset. So now as the head controller moves, so does that clown nose. Okay. Then we're going to just create a motion trail of it. So visualize, editable motion trail. The only thing you have to do is allow objects with no keys. Right here. So apply. And now you can see the motion of the head and especially of the direction of his gaze throughout the whole animation, because that butterfly shape is what his head is doing. And then when you're done with it, just delete the object and the motion trail will go with it. Yeah. So you can kind of see places where, oh, I was playing it backwards, places where there's little hiccups and extra motions where maybe it needs a little bit more easing on the body. But it's a nice way to be able to visualize exactly what's happening. And then, like I said, you just select it, delete, and there you go. And this is our motion trail handle from our hand, which we probably don't need anymore, so we could delete also. Okay. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys to see all of these different steps of polishing the walk. I do still need to show you polishing the foot falls, but I'm not going to go any further with the upper body. I think I can leave it to you to polish all of that. I may show a time lapse where I'm working through it really quickly and show the end result. But the very last thing I'm going to show is how to do the detailed footfalls, which we have not edited beyond our blocking yet.